Hi, I'm Dr. Penny Thompson Kruse, Professor of Violin at Bowling Green State University. I'm putting together this video to help you prepare for the Northwest Regional Violin Auditions. This is District 1 Orchestra. The auditions will take place at Perrysburg High School on September 28th. Michael Smith is the coordinator, and you can find his email above. Your audition begins when you walk into the room. Dress and behave with professionalism. Choose clothing, shoes, and jewelry that are comfortable but not too casual. Get your violin and bow out of the case before you enter the room. Tune to a tuner or have a teacher check your instrument. Have your instrument and music in hand and walk in with confidence and a smile. Check your tuning quickly in case there is a change in the room temperature. This little bit of playing in the room allows you to hear the acoustics. Wait to start until the adjudicator indicates so. Be prepared to play any scales from the OMEA Class A list. This includes 2 octave scales in the keys of C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, G, D, A, and E major. Opinions differ on how the scales should be played. For me, as an adjudicator and a teacher, hearing your scales is like a doctor listening to your heartbeat. I learn a great deal about your playing and make an immediate assessment after hearing your scales. Therefore, I recommend playing them in a way that demonstrates your best sound, intonation, bow control, steady tempo, and left hand facility. Be sure to know the key signatures and whole step, half step patterns in all the keys. Determine your fingerings ahead of time. Set your left hand position before you start. Breathe. Use full bows. Don't avoid the frog. Your contact point should be halfway between the bridge and the fingerboard, maintaining a 90-degree angle to the string. Always start and end in the same position in the left hand. Make shifts, bow changes, and string crossings as smooth as possible. I prefer to hear scales in auditions with vibrato. I also encourage my students to play 3 octave scales if they can play them well, even though only 2 are required. Do not play 3 octave scales if you are not prepared to do so. No bowing or tempo is indicated for the scales. Do not play them too slowly or at a breakneck speed. Use a good amount of bow for projection with a good contact point, aiming for at least a mezzo forte, without diminuendoing, getting softer towards the top of the scale or as you go from the frog to the tip. If you are comfortable slurring 2 or 3 notes to a bow, I find that perfectly acceptable. Whatever you do, remember to maintain your tempo, articulation, tone quality, and dynamic throughout. In auditions, do not stop if you make a mistake. Refocus and keep going. I tune all 4 strings to my tuner, equal temperament. Should you wish to play along with me, I will do that now. Some tuners only have a visual indication of intonation accuracy. I find practicing against the drone much more helpful to improving my intonation. With only a visual cue, I tend to overcorrect one way and then the other, without actually hearing where the note sounds most in tune. You can download pitches on your computer if you do not have a tuner, and there are also applications available on smartphones. Here's a demonstration of me practicing my scale against the tuner. This is B flat. So you may notice I'm making slight adjustments as I listen to the tuner and create that interval. Play the two excerpts in the order on the audition sheet. Wolfart followed by Beethoven. The Wolfart is part of a larger étude. The indicated tempo marking is allegro, and the metronome marking is dotted quarto equals 112. Try to stay as close to that marking as possible. Practice with the metronome every day. Start at a slower tempo during the learning process. 6/8 time signature indicates that there are 2 beats per measure. 6/8 is in compound time, meaning that there are 3 parts to every beat, and the dotted quarter gets the beat. The upper number is divided by 3 to indicate the number of beats. The bottom number indicates the division of the beat, which is 8th notes. In performance without the metronome, be sure not to rush when it is easy and slow down when it is difficult. I suggest practicing with the metronome using the 8th note subdivisions. Before you begin playing your excerpts in an audition, be sure to count out several measures in your head to get the tempo before you start. Stars and Stripes Forever is universally sung in about quarter note equals 120. So if you think of that tune slightly slower and then divide 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you will be very close to the 112 marking. One recurring issue with études is that students forget that they still are allowed to be musical, even though the étude is primarily focusing on certain aspects of technique. This étude consists of all 8th notes, so be sure and shape the musical line so it won't sound notey. No dynamic is indicated, so I would play in the mezzo forte to forte range. I would play the 8th notes on the string in the middle of the bow with flexibility in the right hand knuckles, wrist, and elbow joint, but with the majority of the motion coming from the elbow joint. A circular motion will create the string crossings with minimal effort. The key of this étude is D major, a bright sounding key on the violin because of the resonance of open strings. F sharps and C sharps should be high. Make sure that you set up your left hand securely with the first finger in 3rd position before you start. The opening D is at the beginning of the first 3 measures, and each one must match. Also, a good left hand frame will ensure the D octave between the 1st and 4th fingers. The half step between the D and C sharp should be close. Shifts in this étude conveniently happen after an open string. Use that open string to get your hand into the new position. Don't wait until you get to the new note in the new position because you will be late. Equally important is not to cheat the length of the open string note because you're in a hurry to shift. I find it helpful to look at the underlying harmony. The first measure is a D major arpeggio. The second measure is a G major arpeggio. And then it's back to a D major arpeggio. These, of course, alternate with the 4-3-4 D C sharp. This sequence creates a harmonic rhythm that changes each measure. Measures 4 and 5 are more linear as the line ascends and then descends, changing the melodic shape established in the first three measures. I would play those measures slightly more legato and with a slight hairpin. The next two measures have a similar ascending and descending shape around the A major arpeggio. The eighth measure is similar to the first, but with a broken octave on the second half of the measure. Measure 9 starts a new pattern that is 4 measures long. These 4 measures are repeated exactly with the exception of a change that occurs in the fourth measure. I would play the second time softer. As you heard, the last measure modulates to G minor, and you have a sequence similar to the beginning. The next sequence starts on the next E flat. Don't forget that you played an E flat in the measure before, and you must start again with E flat. A chromatic line starting on E flat alternates with the D. Make sure that the tritone, or the augmented fourth, between the D and G sharp is wide enough. The top A can either be fingered with a fourth finger extension to a harmonic, or played on the E string with a solid first finger, crescendo through that chromatic line. The next two measures transition back to the opening material. In third position, you should have a sense of the body of the instrument, but on a full size, your wrist should not rest there. Maintain a relaxed left wrist that is not hyperextended or collapsed. Be sure to rotate the arm forward and over to the left so that all 4 fingers fall naturally curled over the strings. In shifts, move the entire arm as a unit. Be careful not to forget to move the thumb with the arm and the hand. Practice matching the first finger in third position against your open D. Although this étude is not as difficult as the Beethoven excerpt, do not neglect it. Your tempo, tone, and intonation must be flawless. Inconsistencies of intonation are particularly obvious in the key of D major. The secret to good intonation, along with careful listening, is a consistent hand position and keeping the fingers as close to the string as possible. There are several practice strategies that I would suggest. The first would be dotted rhythms. Dovetail bowing. Slurring groups of notes while watching to make sure that you're not picking up the left-hand fingers if necessary. Another way is to practice small groups of notes as fast as you can, followed by a rest. You can do this based on which notes are on the same string and within the same position. you can group it by 3s or 6s. This allows you time in between to think and reset. I will play through the excerpt twice, once in a slow practice tempo and once at performance tempo. So now I will put the metronome on dotted quarter equals 78 with the 8th note subdivisions and play through the Wolfart excerpt. I'm going to check my open D and my first finger and my octave. Now I will do the excerpt in tempo. The Beethoven Romance in F major was written for violin and orchestra, and later there was a piano reduction. I checked imslp.org for articulations and dynamics and was pleasantly surprised to find the original manuscript and full orchestral score provided by Breitkopf and Hertel. This allowed me to see what differences might exist between what was written in your music and what Beethoven originally wrote. The turns, as in the first measure, were not written out as individual pitches. There was the symbol of the turn. And so that should help you think of making that more singing. Therefore, you should play those in a more natural singing manner. Almost no dynamic markings are indicated in the original score. The metronome marking that you have is provided by the editor, but it is very helpful. The Romance has 4 slow beats per measure, but should be subdivided into 8th or even 16th notes at times for good rhythm, sometimes even 30 seconds. The melody is accompanied by quarter notes at the beginning. This romance was written in 1798, in the middle of Beethoven's life. Beethoven was frequently in love, and we can imagine this piece as a dialogue between the violin and the orchestra. It's important to think about the key of F major, because Beethoven used that key for his 6th symphony, the Pastoral Symphony, and also in the Spring Sonata for violin and piano, Sonata number 5, and therefore the key of F major is often considered the key of nature. We have musical indications from the composer of dolce, suite, and adagio cantabile. Cantabile meaning playing in a singing style. Since there is no opening dynamic, I would suggest something between a mezzo piano and a mezzo forte. There are several options for fingerings. You can start in the first position and stay there for the first 2 measures. You will need to have a nice vibrato on every finger, but especially the pinky. As you noticed, I stayed in first position and I didn't shift to the 2nd finger on the B flat. I felt that is preferable to the to that shift, because generally we don't shift after a quick note if possible. Another fingering option is to start on the A string in 4th position, and you will have to do a half step shift between the E and the F, and then another half shift. Once again, you need to have a nice vibrato on your pinky. And make sure the dotted 8 16th note figure is very even. No matter what fingering you use, the dotted 8 16th figure must be rhythmically accurate but still lyrical. Take a moment to compare this rhythm to the rhythm that's in measure 56, which has a double dotted 8 followed by a 32nd. The vibrato that I suggest for this romance would be continuous between fingers, fairly narrow and fast. The grace notes in measure 43 should be quick and on the beat. The turn in measure 47 is performed as a D, E, D, C sharp, D. Be sure to finish the turn so that the E and F 16ths are in time. The pickup 8th note at the end of measure 42 works well to start in 1st position on the 2nd finger. But in the next measure, I find the printed fingering awkward. It indicates 3, 1. I prefer to do a smaller shift, 1, 2, and then another smaller shift to 3. Then the next passage can either be done 1, 2, 2, 3 and crossing over to a 4, or if you prefer to keep the sound on the E string, do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. The next passage is repeated, so I would do the first time on the E string as indicated and the second time on the A string as indicated. Play slightly louder on the E string. At the end of that, I go to 1st finger rather than 2nd finger so that I don't make such a big shift. After the 1st finger on the E, I do 2, 1, and then a half step shift in order to take me back to 5th position. Make sure that the shift is very light. All shifts should be hidden as much as possible, either under a bow, at a bow change, half step shifts, or when under a slur by lightening up in the bow. In the last measure of this line, rather than go to 2nd position, I go to 3rd position. The second part of the romance, beginning in measure 50, starts in 2nd position on 2nd finger. You might practice finding that against your open A. In the next measure, you have a 2-2 shift. And that's one of those places where I have to lighten up in the bow and the finger because I'm doing it under a slur. The piano dynamic in measure 52 is not in the score, so I wouldn't perceive that as a subito piano playing softer. I would think of the whole thing as a crescendo and then a diminuendo at the last bar of the line. The fingering in measure 52 with the 4/4 does work. Once again, if you lighten up in the bow and the left hand. But if that is a problem and you are getting too much slide, try 4, 3, 2, 1, 1. Then the next note could be on the A string, or you can do an extension back to the E string to first finger G. That keeps the same tone color. Make sure that the last quarter note of the line is held full value. The last line, starting in measure 54, indicates an open A half note starting up bow at the tip. Make sure you're subdividing. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. I suggest to find that high D, you practice shifting with an intermediate tone from the 3rd position to D. First finger in 6th position from A to D, and then climbing up with each finger to your 4th finger. If you feel the open string sounds too strident, try playing the A in 3rd position on the D string. Then do a quick shift at the bow change. As before, shifting to the D and dropping the 4th finger onto the G. Sustain and crescendo through the long notes and the following 16th notes. Another half-step shift is required on the descent. Make sure that the half step between D and C sharp is very close. Then shift to 3rd position and make sure that's a B flat. A very light shift up to 5th position and light shift back to 2nd. And a long quarter note to end. You might practice that shift from 3rd position to an A harmonic with your 3rd finger. And then when you feel good about that, play with a solid finger. This piece might be easier to learn if you leave out the trills and the ornaments the first time. The ornaments and the trills are like the bling that make it really fun and interesting. So I'm going to play and leave out some of those details. Practice it would be with constant 30 seconds, and this time I'll start on the A string. Now I'll play through the entire excerpt for you. prior to your audition? Have you cleaned your strings? Here is the URL for a website to demonstrate that. How old are your strings? Should you change them before the audition? Make sure you change them early enough that they can stretch. Have you cut your fingernails short on your left hand? Does your bow need to be rehaired? Are you standing so that your F-holes face the judges? Take a deep breath before you start each part of the audition. The judges want you to play your best. I hope that you have found this video helpful. I welcome you to friend me on Facebook, Penny Thompson Kruse, and like the BGSU Violin Studio Facebook page. You can contact me via email or phone for additional help, and look forward to the video to help you prepare for the All-State Orchestra seating audition. Thanks so much.